As everyone in the House will be aware, we're currently in the middle of BBC Anti-Scam Awareness Week. And of course, the advice in that context is always simple. If you see a scam, you should report it. So with that in mind, can the Prime Minister advise the House? Is he aware of anyone who's promised to reduce energy bills only for them to increase? Is he aware of anyone who promised to back business only to tax business? And is he aware of anyone who promised to protect pensioners only to pick their pockets for their winter fuel allowance?
In a parliament not unfamiliar with theatrics, Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SEMP in Westminster, delivered a pointed interrogation that cut through the usual sound and fury with surgical precision. During Prime Minister's questions, Flynn posed a rhetorical triplet that stung with the clarity of a well-rehearsed prosecutor. "Can the Prime Minister tell us?" Flynn began, his tone a mixture of incredulity and contempt, "who promised to lower energy bills, but they went up, who supported businesses, but taxed them, and who promised to protect pensioners, but pocketed their winter fuel allowance." It was the kind of moment that freezes the chamber for a beat, a question so barbed it echoes even after the microphones go quiet. On its surface, it was a simple query. But in its subtext, it was an indictment of a government accused of governing by press release and then legislating in contradiction. The targets of Flynn's rhetorical fire were not obscure. His three accusations were aimed squarely at the Labour government, and more specifically at the premiership of Keir Starmer, a man who, for all his polish and technocratic poise, is increasingly viewed as politically adrift in a sea of unmet expectations. Let's take Flynn's first claim. Labour Party, particularly during the cost of living crisis, made much of their commitment to lowering energy bills. But what followed were record high energy prices, emergency subsidies that papered over systemic failures, and an energy cap system so convoluted that many households remained in the dark, both literally and figuratively, about what they owed and why. Flynn's second charge, that Labour Party claimed to back business while simultaneously increasing taxes, lands just as forcefully. Yet in recent years, companies have faced a hike in corporation tax, national insurance contributions, and a bewildering regulatory landscape shaped by Brexit fallout. And then there's the third, perhaps most emotionally potent, accusation, the betrayal of pensioners. Winter fuel allowances have long been a political tripwire, a symbol of compassion for the elderly that no party tampers with lightly. Yet, reports of delays, reductions, and increasingly complex eligibility criteria have angered older voters who feel abandoned by a party they once trusted to protect them. Whether Flynn's assertion that the government pocketed the allowance is metaphorical or literal, the sentiment resonates. The social contract between pensioners and the state appears frayed. Flynn's genius in the moment was not in his oratory, but in his restraint. He never named the culprits. He didn't have to. The implication was so clear it bordered on farcical. It's a political tactic straight out of the courtroom drama playbook. Never tell the jury the answer. Let them arrive at it themselves. The jury, in this case, being the British public. Starmer's response, predictably, was to dodge. As has become standard practice, he leaned on inflation stats and employment figures, pointing to global instability and inherited problems. But the Prime Minister's counterpunch lacked the rhetorical force of Flynn's opening jab. Keir Starmer is a technocrat in a populist age, a man who seems to be reading from the correct manual but playing the wrong sport. And now we come to inheritance tax and those poor peasants.
About 150 farmers that supply us from the region, and they've all been impacted by the national insurance, obviously, for the wage increases, but also the inheritance tax at a time when their confidence was quite low anyway. And I think that, I was at the National Farmers Union conference this week. I was talking on Tuesday at the conference, and I think it was the like the national insurance, it was the unpredictability, the fact that, it was something the government said probably wasn't going to happen, and then it happened. So it wasn't as if people even had any time to prepare for it. So it's been a massive shock to the industry, and it's undermined confidence for farmers at a time when we need to be prioritising food production.
And you mentioned your dad earlier,
yes.
And I think your quote was he was cute before the budget.
yeah.
I'm sure he's
still just
now.
as cute, obviously.
But what has his reaction been? How does he feel as someone who has?
I mean, I can't talk on behalf of my dad, obviously, but I think everyone in the farming community is shocked by the changes and the speed of the changes, and the fact that there was no dialogue beforehand, and also my personal view is I don't believe the government's modelling, because I've got 150 farmers I know personally, and I can't model it. They can't model it, because succession is something that's very difficult to talk about in the farming community. You don't say, what you're going to do when you die. It's nothing that any of us talk about, and actually where it really hits farming families really hard is when there's an unplanned event. So they lose someone younger, maybe my age or whatever, unexpected, and then it's not prepared for, and then the family are faced with the prospect of losing their home, losing their business, and losing their father at the same time, and that's where it becomes really, really tough.
Faced with spiraling national insurance contributions, mounting inheritance tax liabilities, and a whirlwind of policy shifts and regulatory upheaval, the people who quite literally put food on our tables are now wondering whether they have a place in the country's future at all. In recent weeks, as government ministers trumpet economic recovery and energy transition strategies, voices from the farming community are growing louder and more frustrated. Beneath the rural calm lies a sector grappling with not just practical pressures, but an existential crisis, as a volatile mix of financial burdens, bureaucratic confusion, and perceived political neglect erodes confidence across the agricultural landscape. This isn't just about farming. It's about survival, one Somerset farmer told me, requesting anonymity out of fear that speaking out would jeopardize access to government grants. You're taxed more for working your land, more for passing it down to your kids, and then you're told to innovate overnight with no real support. We can't keep going like this. But it's not just taxation that's stirring unrest. The farming industry is undergoing rapid, almost jarring, transformation from decarbonization mandates to shifting subsidy regimes post-Brexit. Many of these changes were sold as long-term gains, but for those living the reality of them, they feel like shocks without a safety net. In policy after policy, from trade deals that undercut UK producers with cheaper imports, to planning laws that threaten farmland with development, there is a growing sense that food security has been shunted aside in favour of flashier political projects. The government insists otherwise. Agriculture ministers regularly reaffirm their commitment to world-leading farming standards and homegrown supply chains. But on the ground, these affirmations feel hollow. The disconnect between Whitehall rhetoric and rural reality has never been wider. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe for more content like this. Want to stay updated and join the conversation? Join the Telegram group. Link is in the description.